Good afternoon. I'm Michaela Miller with the Monday edition of the Our City COVID-19 News Show. We will be updating you on the latest information and resources around the COVID-19 pandemic while unpacking deeper issues as they emerge. We encourage you to get in touch with us. We want to hear from you as we welcome contributions from movements, healthcare providers and our audience. We want this program to be a two-way flow of information, so please get in touch with us. Today, we will be looking at new research by the Global Drug Survey Group. The survey was designed to develop a better understanding of how people have adapted to restrictions related to the global coronavirus pandemic. Later in the show, we will also be looking into misleading advertising. And now for the news. As the national lockdown continues, the current number of confirmed COVID-19 cases in South Africa stands at 10,015, with 4,173 recoveries and 194 deaths. The Western Cape, which is still the epicenter of the deadly virus, has 5,307 confirmed COVID-19 cases, 1,739 recoveries and 102 deaths. The lockdown has lent even more urgency to the search for a missing 13-year-old girl from Samora Michelle, who was last seen by her father in Brown's Farm on the 6th of May. Lusanda Notununu was wearing a white top and black shirt. She has brown eyes and a small nose, is of small and average height, and wears her hair in long brown braids. Missing Persons Organization, the Pink Ladies, said they could not be on ground due to lockdown, but anyone with information could contact them on 0722 177 439 or 0833 778 4882. If you want to share information anonymously, contact Crime Stop on 08600 10111 or SMS Crime Line on 322211. Health Minister William Kize is concerned about the spread of coronavirus between the Western Cape and Eastern Cape provinces. The two provinces were responsible for 84% of new cases in the country reported over the weekend. Premier Helen Windy and other provincial officials met Mkhize over the weekend over concerns about the rapid spike in cases. He said the Western Cape government was working on a strategy to tackle the spread of coronavirus hotspots and ensuring citizens actively followed the rules. The Sarki Batman Center of Vulnerable Women and Children had to be evacuated early this morning after a fire broke out on the first floor dormitory. Fire and Rescue spokesperson Jermaine Carlser said fire crews from Epi, Guguletu and Archie responded to the call and the fire was extinguished by 8:53 a.m.
Women and children had to be evacuated from the Sarki Apartment Center in Manenberg when a fire broke out in a first-floor dormitory this morning. The city's fire and rescue service was alerted to the fire at the shelter for vulnerable women and children in Klipfontein Road just after 7 this morning, and fire crews from Epping, Guguletu and Ottery responded to this incident. A 7-month pregnant woman was treated for shortness of breath and taken to a nearby hospital, but no other injuries were reported. The fire was extinguished at approximately 7 minutes to 9.
A Curls River bottle store in the latest liquor outlet to be hit in a series of burglaries as alcohol sales remain prohibited during lockdown level 4. A private security company said its central station dispatched an armed reaction officer who arrived on scene and found the front display window partially broken. The business was searched, but the suspects had already fled. Meanwhile, a quick response by the flying squad members to a tip-off resulted in the arrest of 3 men for being in possession of lobster tails. Police spokesperson Nolihiso Ruiklana said the suspects were arrested in Grassy Park. The Western Cape has recorded 5,307 COVID-19 infections with 3,565 active cases and 1,739 recoveries. There have been 102 deaths. Western Cape Premier Helen Wendy said data indicated that the virus was spreading faster as we hit a new phase of the pandemic, one that every province would experience. The Premier will be welcoming President Cyril Ramaphosa when he visits the province on Friday. Now it's time for an ad break. We'll be back shortly. Welcome back. You're still watching the Our City COVID-19 show with me, Michaela Miller. We will be giving you the latest updates on the COVID-19 pandemic and sharing essential resources and information with you. Ayanda Nabe spoke to Dr. Adam R. Winstock, a founder member of the Global Drug Survey Group, which recently created a survey to develop a better understanding of how people adapted to the restrictions related to the global pandemic, which could provide guidance on what works well for different groups and help inform future debates on drug policy and public health.
Hello, my name is Ayanda Nabe, and today I'm speaking to Dr. Adams. It's Adam Winstock. He's from the GDS, Doctor? Am I correct?
Global Drug Survey, yes.
Yes. I would like you to introduce yourself to us again, please.
So my name's Adam Winstock. I'm a consultant psychiatrist, and I specialise in people who have problems with drugs and alcohol. And we also run the world's biggest drug survey, and we're running a survey now on the impact of COVID-19 on people's lives and how it's affecting us.
You know, it's very interesting that you say you're dealing with the impacts of drug abuse and how we deal with it in society in relation to the current situation of COVID-19. So what has been your understanding? What is the best thing that government should do? I know in South Africa we've been very drastic to say no alcohol, no cigarettes. What would you suggest?
I think COVID has taught us that the most important thing any governments can do are to improve the living circumstances for people. Without a roof over our head to keep us safe, without a bed to sleep on, and without food in our stomach, anything else we do when we're trying to treat other problems like drug and alcohol are really limited. So the first focus is make sure people are safe, give them accommodation, give them food. And then you can start looking at helping them with their other problems. By stopping access to alcohol and tobacco, you're going to make a lot of people's lives very difficult. I know that some people will say that reducing access will reduce risks of violence, perhaps, but people who are dependent on alcohol, when they can't drink, they become very unwell. People can die from alcohol withdrawal. Mm-hmm. It's a different balance.
Yes. It's interesting that I want to come back to the point that, you know, what government responsibilities should be. I want to go back now to talk about, we talk about the withdrawal symptoms. What are they? And one would want to know how they actually turn out in real life.
So there's most people who are dependent on alcohol probably don't think they are, and they don't know it. If somebody wants to know if they're dependent on alcohol, they can download our free app. It's called the Drinks Meter, or it's at drinksmeter.com. It takes a few minutes and it will tell you whether you've got a problem with drinking. Some people, of course, know that if they don't have a drink in the morning when they wake up, or they don't drink by lunchtime, they start to feel a little bit anxious, unwell, a little bit sweaty, they lose their appetite, they start to shake. They would be the typical symptoms. But a lot of people manage those by drinking alcohol. Mm-hmm. If you can't get hold of alcohol, those symptoms get worse. People start becoming very agitated. They can't sleep. Some people can start becoming confused. They can hear voices. They can see things. People can have epileptic fits, and they can die. And we know that alcohol withdrawal particularly makes you very susceptible to respiratory infections. In fact, people who drink a lot have suppressed immune systems, so they're very vulnerable to getting infections, and they often don't eat. So people who drink are at risk.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it's interesting that you mentioned that alcohol, if the dependence of alcohol affects the respiratory system. But you know, for a very long time, and many of us, we believe that it's smoking that actually affects the respiratory system, and did not understand the issue that alcohol is just as bad.
Yeah, look, I don't know. Alcohol's, so smoking's definitely the worst thing you can do for your lungs and will increase your risk of getting COVID. But you're right, lots of people don't realise alcohol also increases risk of things like chest infections.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. On a social level, Doctor, I mean, we've seen in our media how the withdrawal symptoms have led to violence in many homes. Would you attest to that? Do you think that the withdrawal symptoms also include violence, which might increase the domestic violence in some cases?
I think alcohol increases domestic violence, both when people are intoxicated, when they're drunk and they're not thinking and they lose their temper. That's what we normally think about when we think of alcohol and domestic violence. But alcohol withdrawal makes you very agitated, very restless. You can't sleep, and would also increase the risk. You know, the safest thing in a domestic violence relationship is to be able to separate. But with lockdown, we have people who can't escape from that environment. What we're also understanding now is that domestic abuse is now perhaps moving online. There's controlling behaviors through Zoom and through text messages and WhatsApp and FaceTime. I think alcohol can destroy a relationship when you're drinking and when you try to stop.
When you try to stop. You know, there's something I want us to talk about a little bit more, and it's the issue that, you know, these symptoms, withdrawal symptoms, they can even lead to death. And, you know, one is interested to know, in that case, what should government actually do to mitigate that, okay? Because we seem to believe that consumption and overconsumption, in our cases, in the social aspect, it has led to violence and death. But what you are saying is physically, it is very rough on the person that has now suddenly stopped. And I would like to hear a little bit more detail on that.
So the advice that we gave to people who drank, who didn't think they could cut down with help, with medication, was to start cutting down their alcohol about 10% every 3 or 4 days. And we have a video on our website that helps people reduce. So it's a case of not stopping suddenly. So if someone normally wakes up and starts drinking at maybe 1 o'clock in the afternoon, we would be saying, well, maybe they drink 2 bottles of wine or 10 beers. We would say, have your first drink at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and instead of drinking 10 beers that day, have 9. 2 or 3 days later, drink 8. 2 or 3 days later, drink 7, and very gradually reduce. And the government can put that sort of advice out. There is also medication that can be prescribed by a doctor. They're Valium-type drugs that, under supervision and monitoring by a doctor or other healthcare professional, can help reduce the risk of very dangerous withdrawal symptoms. It's not something for people to do on their own. And very importantly, if you mix alcohol with the medications that we use to treat alcohol withdrawal, you can increase the risk of people not breathing and dying. So it's risky, and it requires medical attention.
So the medical attention, what would you suggest in this time of COVID, understanding our situation in South Africa, the economic situation, what would you suggest would be the best thing to do for government?
So I think that government always needs to look at how can they reduce the number of people in the population who drink too much. And we know that the best way of getting populations to drink less, and this will not be popular for people who like drinking, is to make it more expensive, to reduce the number of places you can buy alcohol, to reduce the opening hours. But it's also for governments to educate their population. And most people who are heavy drinkers don't think they're heavy drinkers. They will say, I don't drink a lot. I drink the same as all of my friends do.
You know,
and that's why...
sorry, let me allow you to go ahead.
And that's why we've created the Drinks Meter app, where people can get confidential, anonymous advice. Because sometimes people won't want to tell their doctor or their family how much they're drinking. They're ashamed, they're embarrassed. We need to give people a private space to think about that. And if they need help, they can then seek it.
But here's the thing in South Africa, though. when it comes particularly to cigarette or tobacco use, we found that even in as much as government has tried over the years to increase the price of cigarettes, it hasn't really stopped the consumption. You find that people continue, and I mean, new entrants, people continue and new ones begin. So how do we mitigate all of that? It seems to be a problem.
It's taken the UK government and Australia 30 years to shrink the levels. That's partly by significant increases in price, but it's, for example, banning advertising, it's plain paper packaging, it's making sure the tobacco companies understand that they are selling a drug that kills people, and it's putting restrictions on access. Having a packet of cigarette that doesn't have any beautiful image but just has a picture of a dying person can change people's behavior. But you also make other forms of nicotine available, whether they are e-cigarettes or nicotine patches. You give people the opportunity to know there are other ways of getting nicotine into their body than smoking. But it will take a generation.
You know, I'm very interested to know a little bit more. I'm sorry, because I'm not very conversant with these issues. Of course, I use neither of the two. If I want to know more about this organization that has such interesting work that you work for, where would I find that information, please?
So if you go to the Global Drug Survey website, so that's www.globaldrugsurvey.com, there's lots of information there. If you go to drinksmeter.com or you go to the App Store for the Drinks Meter, that will give you the alcohol app that I've spoken about. But if you go to our YouTube channel, which is the Global Drug Survey YouTube channel, there's lots of videos there which are about helping people get information. So we have 25-minute videos on alcohol, the risks, the harm, and how you can reduce. We're putting out one on Monday, which is for cannabis users who may mix with tobacco. And what we say is, you don't have to mix cannabis with tobacco to enjoy cannabis. All you're doing is increasing your lung risk, you're increasing your risk of being dependent, and there are other ways of enjoying cannabis. And now South Africa has a legal cannabis market. The government should be getting people to use cannabis in the safest possible way, which is vaping or eating it.
Well, Dr. Winstock, I've got to thank you for this presentation. Thank you so much. It was so interesting talking to you. South Africans, let's stay safe and let's fight this together. Let's flatten this curve of COVID-19. Doctor, goodbye, and at home, we'll be back again.
Ayanda also spoke to Joanne Fairbrother about a new ruling in the case against Fair Cape and the company's use of the terms humane and happy cows in their advertising. By using these terms, the Advertising Regularity Board ruled they were in breach of the Code of Advertising Practice.
Hello, my name is Ayanda Nabe, and today we're talking about unfair advertising or dishonest advertising, and we're talking to Joanne Fairbrother. She'll be talking about a case that relates to Fair Cape dairies. Joanne, hello and welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me on.
Yes, we believe you're one of the militant ones who've taken Fair Cape dairies to task, you know, because of the unfair advertising. And I'm interested to, in fact, I should let you tell us a little bit more about the story, the background of it. How did this case even come about?
Yeah, well, I think it's important to note that Fair Cape has got a history of misleading advertising. This started back in 2013, I believe, with the Grass Consumer Group, who are now Integrity. And they did a story on them for using the terms free range in their advertising, where they are actually, the free range dairy actually does not exist at all in South Africa. So one of the things that Fair Cape did is they called their free range Fair Cape free range with a trademark at the end of it, and you know what they uncovered is that their cows are kept in sheds for the majority of the year. So yeah, so they did quite a lot of coverage on that, and there were multiple terms that they were using that would be considered greenwashing or humane washing. So Fair Cape went ahead and you know we laid a charge or a complaint with the Advertising Regulatory Board for the use of the term humane and also happy cows. yeah, so we went ahead and did that, and the Advertising Regulatory Board ruled in our favor.
Mm-hmm. But you know, what is very interesting, Joe, is that how do you even get to know that what they're saying is not true? If they say it's free range, I mean, there's so many shops that sell us free range, and the minute you hear free range and you think this is the healthiest, I'm running for it. And now we discover that in the case of Faircape Dairies, it was not the case. How would I know as a consumer that, you know, it's actually not free range?
Well, I think this is the problem with dairy in general. It helps to understand a little bit about the dairy industry and to know which questions to ask. Because Faircape and a lot of the dairy industry, they operate under the illusion of transparency.
Yes.
So they will say things like free range or happy cows, but we have to know which questions to ask them. For example, you know, one of the questions that we keep asking Faircape, but they can't seem to answer, is what happens to the bobby calves, which are the male calves that are basically a byproduct of the dairy industry. Mm-hmm. So it's important to be aware that most people, they just aren't aware of the standard practices, and so these aren't abnormalities. This is standard practice in the dairy industry. A lot of people are not aware that cows need to be permanently pregnant in order to produce milk, like all other mammals. So one thing that happens is we have to look at the males that are a byproduct of this industry.
Yes.
And what happens to the bobby calves. So in South Africa, there's 200,000 bobby calves that are born into South Africa as a byproduct. And we have to ask the dairy industry what happens to those calves. And often, you know, they'll be killed on the farm shortly after birth or sold at an auction for cheap meat, and they will end up going into informal settlements and dying of, you know, of other causes because people don't know how to care for them properly. So these are questions that we should be asking the dairy industry, and this is why we went after Faircape specifically, because they claim that they're you know, their products are happy and humane, and the cows are happy, and so forth.
You know, you've raised one thing, a point that, you know, this cheap meat ends up in the poor communities. Okay, so, I mean, I'm trying to understand, Joe, what is this cheap meat? What is it made of? Is it chemical component that makes them onto charts that cost them at such low prices? And are they even aware of the health impact this has on the people that they're selling it to?
Oh, I'm not aware of any chemical components. In terms of cheap meat, the bobby calves themselves, it's just that they're absolutely worthless to the dairy industry. So they would be sent off to an auction, and you know that meat is just a lot more affordable than other meat. So I can answer questions on that, but I don't know anything about chemicals.
Okay, so they're worthless in the sense that you cannot milk them.
No, definitely not. And then they're not bred for meat. Well, some dairy cows might be. They can use them for both, but the majority of bobby male calves are killed at a very young age.
All right, I get that, Joe. I get that you could ask those questions to the bosses of fair dairies. But as a consumer, how would I know that what I'm getting is actually what they're promising me? You know, it's really a humane cow, it's a happy cow, it's a free range. How would I know as a consumer?
Well, you won't, because the dairy industry is just not honest. It's about what they don't tell you. You have to know which types of questions to ask them. You know, as well as what happens to the cows, the dairy cows, after they after they're not producing their milk quota. These cows only live till about 7 years of age, and then they go straight to the slaughterhouse when they're no longer of value. So, you know, these dairy cows spend the majority of their lives pregnant, and like all other mammals, they form strong bonds with their young.
Yeah.
And babies are taken away from them, so we can have their milk, basically. So, you know, we have to be asking the dairy industry these questions, and we have to ask them, you know, to have honest advertising which is they are not doing.
So if they had honest advertising, they would not use words like humane, they would not use happy cows or free range. What would they use? I'm just curious to know if what the words, that the selection of words, would it enable them to make profits? Or, I mean, what would they say so that when I see that kind of an advert as a consumer, I would know this is a runaway from product?
I don't quite understand the question.
What would be the selection of words, you know, if they were honest advertisers? I mean...
honest advertising, I'm sure they could say a lot of things. I don't know exactly what they would say, but they certainly wouldn't be saying humane or happy cows, because that's certainly not anything that they can prove. And certainly they cannot prove it in front of the Advertising Regulatory Board.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious to know.
They had plenty of opportunity to respond to our appeal, of which they did not address any of our concerns.
Yes. So now my question is, they lost the case. You won. Happy customer. That is me. Now, what was the penalty to Fair Cape Dairies?
There isn't any penalty. At this stage, they only have to remove the terms happy cow and humane from any of their advertising material. And we will see what happens. They might appeal as well, and this might keep going on a little bit more. But at this stage, that's all that they need to do.
There is no penalty? And they've ripped us off?
There's no penalty.
And they've ripped us off as consumers?
Excuse me?
I'm saying there's no penalty, and yet they've cheated us as consumers?
Exactly.
So what?
Exactly. I think the most important thing is for people to just become informed of the facts in the dairy industry. When we are informed, we can start making choices, and we can start knowing which questions to ask them and how to read between the lines and what to look for.
And that was going to be my next question. How then do we keep the consumers informed? To be honest, I'm one of those. If I'm told this is free range, I run for it. This is my go-to product. Now you're telling me that, you know, what I believe could have been my go-to product might not even be, you know. So how do you keep consumers informed? Now I know Fair Dairy story. Who else? How will I know the other companies that are practicing dishonest and unfair advertising?
It's hard to tell. It's hard to tell. At this stage, again, it's a question of informing ourselves of standard practices as far as possible. You know, another case is Pick n Pay calls their pork kinder to sows, where these pigs spend slightly longer time outside of their crates and farrowing crates. Which is incredibly cruel practice that the South African Pork Association have even said that they need to phase out. It's factory farmed pork, just the same as all other factory farmed pork. Yes, Pick n Pay is still allowed to label their pork kinder to sows. So that is incredibly unfortunate. And the SPCA also brought that case in front of the Advertising Regulatory Board, and they unfortunately lost. So it's incredibly difficult to tell, especially, again, as consumers, we want to know, you know, what is okay and what isn't okay, and we want to make informed choices, but it makes it incredibly difficult for us when the facts are obscure. So all that we can do, again, is try to inform ourselves as much as possible and listen to what the SPCA is saying, listen to perhaps what other organizations are saying and watchdog organizations are doing.
You know what makes me upset right now is the fact that this thing continues and there's no penalty, okay? What would deter anyone from doing it again? What would deter Fair Cape to continue what they you know, what I almost call an evil practice? I mean, this is not honest. There's no deterrent. Absolutely none. Mm-hmm. But what I want to know from you, do you have a website that I can refer to look at, to see these companies that are dishonest to the consumers, so that I know which one I can run to if I need to buy any product?
That's a very good question. Unfortunately, as far as I know, there isn't a website like this. But I think it would be a fantastic idea if we create one. So thank you for that idea. Okay, and then the other thing, Joe, that I need to talk to you about is how do we mobilize communities to be aware? You know, the citizens must be aware. It's enough that I see it on TV. I mean, we talk about it perhaps on radio,
But what about those that do not have the time to watch TV or to listen to the radios? How do we educate them? Community mobilization, is that something that you're thinking?
Definitely, definitely. I think that's a fantastic idea. Again, it's a question of us all becoming informed and knowing what kind of steps that we can take to take action. And the Advertising Regulatory Board is quite incredible because anybody can submit a complaint. That's what we did. We all acted as independent citizens and we submitted complaints. And they listened. Initially, we did lose our first, they dismissed our first complaint. And then after that, we submitted an appeal that we spent quite a bit of time on, and they listened to it, and we won. So we do have organizations like the Advertising Regulatory Board who will listen to us as independent citizens and consumers.
And we're hoping to get another one that will have biting teeth and enforce penalties upon these organizations that are implementing. So. Okay. So, Joe, thank you so much for being part of the show. Today, I feel like a slightly safer consumer. I now know a little bit more than what I did before, and I hope all our viewers can see that. So I hope to catch up with you sometime again. Thank you so much, Joe, and goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
And to the viewers at home from me, till next time.
Public Services and Administration Minister Senzom Chunu briefed the media on the readiness of public service operations under the Level 4 lockdown. Before departments open for public servants to go back to work, offices will be sanitized, temperature screening introduced, and personal protective equipment and hand sanitizers provided for all workers.
All Directors General and HODs are directed to ensure that all health and precautionary measures to prevent and contain the spread of COVID-19 are adhered to in their respective departments by implementing systems that will manage issues of hygiene and social distancing upon return of employees to the workplace. Given that during the lockdown period, government operations were required to continue, and departments had already identified the critical services that required employees to be physically present at workplace, while others were adapted to online services or remote working, it is advised that with increasing demands of the easing of the lockdown, departments may need to identify more employees responsible for such critical services and recall them back to office if necessary, supplement capacity. In line with the recent circular issued for all DGs and HODs, departments must develop a schedule for a staggered return of the workforce, which will assist in managing the number of employees at the workplace, at the same time to maintain service and business continuity. The schedule must be disseminated to all employees and to be relevant sectors in support of the restart of the economy and other related activities. DGs and HODs must ensure that employees who are required to be at the workplace be issued with requisite permit authorizing travel for workplace purposes. To limit the number of employees arriving, living or working at the same time, the DGs and HODs should consider amending working times to minimize the risk associated with simultaneous arrival and departure of employees. To reduce the number of employees at the same time in common areas such as kitchens and canteens, the staggering of employees' meal intervals and other related activities should be considered. On remote work arrangements, as indicated above, social distancing is an important consideration. As such, remote work has become an important mechanism in the fight against the spread of these COVID-19 diseases. And that's why we've made a reference to the need for us to develop a detailed framework of norms and standards so that people are conscious all the time that as they work from home, there are certain expectations in terms of their work or the work that they need to do while at home as a result of the outbreak of the disease. Where employees can work remotely from their homes, departments are encouraged to continue with this approach, taking into consideration the requirements as outlined in Circular 15 of 2020 with regard to critical and essential services. Further, the departments are asked to strengthen such capabilities by ensuring that employees have necessary resources for remote work and productively utilized. It must be clarified that although employees may be working remotely, they may also be required from time to time to attend the workplace as may be necessary, to, among other things, receive instructions, documentation, access office infrastructure like desktops and other things, and to submit completed tasks where relevant. DGs and HODs must make a determination on employees' readiness to work remotely, of course bearing in mind the higher risk for COVID-19 that COVID-19 poses to older employees and those that present with comorbidities. Those employees will be expected to submit evidential documentation to their human resources so that there's common understanding of how such conditions need to be managed. It will be necessary to go to detail on those with their relevant supervisors. The decision on remote working must be made with due consideration to the service delivery needs of the departments. On workplace preparation in response to the easing of the lockdown incrementally, as departments prepare for the opening and return of employees, which is not now, a thorough cleaning of the workplace will have to be undertaken to ensure it is clean, hygienic, and that all guidelines outlined in Circular 7 of 2020 as they pertain to the preparation for the containment and management of COVID-19 in the public service are observed. These will include temperature screening for each employee entering the building and mandatory wearing of cloth masks at all times in the workplace by non-medical personnel, placing of hand sanitizer strategically at all entrances, common areas, doorways, lifts or elevators, escalators, handrails where office equipment is shared, etc. Visits to the workplace by non-employees must be by prior arrangement and only where absolutely necessary. These exclude service recipients at service delivery points. The detail of such visitors must be recorded for track and trace purposes all the time. All employees whose operational requirements require personal protective equipment should at all times be provided with such. In assisting employees who need support in relation to the impact of COVID-19, departments should ensure that the requisite employee assistance programs are available to offer such support. As we conclude, government further urge citizens to utilize online services where available so as to lessen physical interaction and minimize the risk associated with the transmission of COVID-19 while trying to bring in necessary services back into operation. COVID-19 remains a threat to everyone, and therefore extra care should always be exercised by public servants who are performing their duties during this challenging period. And we urge all public servants to be ambassadors of government in relation to alertness of the danger that all of us are facing.
We are taking a short break. When we come back, Octavian Glovo will update us on the latest social media.
Welcome back. Before the ad break, we had Michaela Miller with the latest news. One of Africa's largest reputation management consultancies, Meg Cartner, has created an animated PSA to educate people on the symptoms of COVID-19 and remind them to practice social distancing to prevent the spread of the new coronavirus infections.
Kusezandleni zakho ukuba uzikhusela njani kwimpilo nokhuseleko lwe-coronavirus wena, intsapho yakho kunye nabo osebenza nabo. Yintoni i-coronavirus, COVID-19? COVID-19 luhlobo lomkhuhlane abantu abazange babe nalo ngaphambili. Abantu abakwazi ukuwumela lo mkhuhlane futhi akukafunyanwa iyeza eluchanayo. COVID-19 iyasuleleka kodwa ayoyikisi njenge-SARS virus. Eyona ndlela yoyilumkela i-COVID-19 kukungadibani nabantu ngobuninzi babo. Sanukoyika, ukuzikhusela nguyena ndongqo wokuhlula le virus. Iindaba ezimnandi, abantu abaninzi amajoni abo omzimba akwimeko entle. Bakufumana nje umkhuhlana ongayindawo, bazikhusela ngokulandela le migaqo. Hlamba izandla zakho imizuzu 20 ngesephu. Ukuba ayikho isephu, sebenzisa isibulala ntsholongwane esine-60% yotywala. Yeka ukubamba amehlo, impumlo kunye nomlomo kuba ngawona masango apho ingena khona intsholongwane. Coca indawo yakho yokusebenza, idesika, ikhitshi, itafile yentlangano, indawo yokutyela, usebenzise isepha, isibulala ntsholongwane. Hlamba izandla zakho emva kokuba ubambe nantoni na njengecango, umnyango weteksi, ikhompyuta, nelayiti yombane nemali. Ukuzikhathalela ukumeko entle yokulwa nentsholongwane. Ukuba ngaba amajoni wakho omzimba akwisimo esihle sempilo, lala ngokwaneleyo, yitya kakuhle, zilolonge, lwisa ingcinezelo yengqondo. Yeka ukuhamba okungabalulekanga eMzantsi Afrika nangaphesheya ukunqanda ukwanda kwentsholongwane. Kuxhomekeke kwihambo yakho, hlala endlini amalanga 14 emva kokushiya indawo apho yandileyo intsholongwane. Eyona nto ibalulekileyo, nangona kunzima ukuba kude nabo abantu abafutshane kuwe, zama ukungadibani nezintlobo zakho, ukunxibelelana nikude kuko okulungeleyo kuwo wonke umntu ukuze sikhuseleke. Ukuba uyaphuma kwakho, zama ukuba ungadibani nabantu abaninzi. Wazi njani ukuba wosulelekile yile ntsholongwane? Amaphawu afana nowomkhuhlane, ukuphelelwa ngumphefumlo, izilonda enqaleni, ukhohlokhohlo olomileyo. Ukuba ngaba ubona ezi mpawu, suxhalaba. Ukuba nolwazi yiyona ndlela yokukhuseleka. Landela i-World Health Organization ukuba uhlale unolwazi nokuba unombuzo. Ungaqala ngokufunda ngokubanzi nge-COVID-19 ngokuthumela igama HI ku-0600 123 456 kuWhatsApp. Le video iqulunqwe yiMagna Carta Reputation Management Consultants kunye nabo basebenzisana nabo kwizwekazi iAfrika. Hlala ukhuselekile, unxulumene nabanye, usebenza, ujonge ikamva xa sizama ukudadela enxwemeni sonke.
And now for social media. Share your thoughts with us on Facebook, we are OurCityCT, and on Twitter at OurCityCT. These are the popular hashtags on Twitter today. Hashtag SASA. Social Development Minister Lindiwe Zulu today issued guidelines for those wanting to apply for the special 350 Rand social relief grant. Anyone already receiving UIF, a social grant or NSFAS grant are not allowed to apply. Hashtag Grade 12. With what will happen to the rest of school year still being debated, many are sparing thoughts for matric students. Will they write this year? Will this year be deferred? Most students don't have access to data or tablets to learn at home. Not an easy time for learners and still no answers. After the ad break, we'll be crossing over to Michaela Miller, who will share information on resources and places of safety that you can use during this period. Stay with us.
Welcome back. You're still tuned into Our City, the COVID show, with me, Michaela Miller. Before the ad break, Octavian Glover looked at what has the nation buzzing on social media platforms. For your latest news around the COVID-19 pandemic and to see what other Cape Townians are doing to keep safe, tune into Cape Town TV Daily. These are some organizations helping communities stay safe during this period. That's all we have for you today, but if you have something to say, we want to hear from you. Send your comments, news and questions to us via Facebook at Our City CT, on Twitter at Our City CT, or get in touch with us via our email on ourcity@capetowntv.org. You can also call us on 021 448 0448. From me, Michaela Miller and Octavian Glover, goodbye.